What's up, y'all, and welcome to Durag Thoughts. My name is Trevor Went. I'm a visual artist raised in Virginia Beach, Virginia. I make art to challenge perspectives and give hope to the marginalized and oppressed. And Durag Thoughts is a space to do just that, talk about topics and conversations that challenge perspectives and give hope to the marginalized and oppressed. And we're in season 2 of the Durag Thoughts series, and we're talking about and talking through my project, the series City of God, that's been rolling out on YouTube over the past couple of weeks. And I hope you've tuned into that. If not, you should go and watch some videos because they're incredible. And today we're going to be talking about the kind of theme surrounding the track that dropped on Monday, Process Place. And so you want to check that out. If you haven't, you probably should push pause on this and then go peep that. Or you could listen to this if you're driving in your car and then go peep it later, but you're going to get spoilers. I'm sorry. But today, my conversation partner is a good friend of mine. If you watch the first episode of the Durag Thoughts Season 2, you've already met this person, but I'm going to say what I want to say about her again. She is the communications manager of Free the Girls, which is a nonprofit that's focused on empowering women who are survivors of sex trafficking. She is a master baker on the low. Okay, she's probably like master baker in training. She has been a person who is just been one of my closest friends, someone who I can go to and talk through all sorts of different things in my life, someone who I've seen aiming to show solidarity to those who are marginalized and oppressed in society, hence why she's in these conversations. It makes a whole lot of sense. Someone who has shown me how to love people better, serve people better, be more hospitable to people. And yeah, just someone that I'm really blessed to call one of my closest friends. And that person is Brittany Newton. What's up, Brittany?
What's up, Trev?
Glad to have you here today. Glad to be chopping it up through this. And so, yeah, I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Me too. Looking forward to it.
All right. So to give people sort of a background, this track, Process Place, the background story surrounding it is I lived in Bristol, Tennessee, and I guess it was a couple years ago. When was that? I guess it was late 2015. Yeah, it was like late 2015 into 2016. And this story is kind of reflection that's like mid 2015 or 2016 rather. And I was living in a place that is the place that's in Johnson Street. If you haven't watched that video, you should go watch the video Johnson Street. And I was living in that place. My old professor from college, who was working in the area as like an art director at that point, allowed me to stay in his spot rent free. And I was working at a church, not making much money, making like $11,000 a year. And I was coming upon the point where he was trying to sell his house. And so I had to leave. My 6 months of having no rent was gone. And I was grateful for that time, but it was time to move on. But I didn't have a lot of money. I wasn't in the best state of mind. If you've listened to Johnson Street, you're going to hear some of those tensions and the things that I was kind of fighting over just depression and loneliness and things like that. And just some of the stuff I was struggling with. And I wasn't really looking for a place like I should have, but it was kind of hard to pull myself out of the way that I was feeling to engage in some of those things and really process some of the traumas and the hurts and the racism and the lack of friendships that were in a current kind of state of ugh. And they were way better before, but just circumstances led to them not being great. And so I wasn't in the best frame of mind. And at the time I was working with or my supervisor at the church I was working with was a cat named Matthew Newton, who's Brittany's late husband. If you've watched the video, you've learned that at the end of the video. Was also one of my closest friends. And Matthew had told me when I first told him that I had like 30 days to get out of this place, that if I needed to, I could move in with them. And so with him and Brittany. And so I kind of within that month, again, like wasn't looking for a spot really well. And ultimately maybe like a week before, I said to Matthew, hey, like, is that offer still open? Can I come and stay in y'all's guest room? And he was like, sure. And without asking Brittany at all, like this had not been mentioned, which was kind of his MO, to just kind of love first and then figure it out later. And so, yeah, so this piece kind of sets in that space of time, and just me processing, being able to like have that space to process. I kind of wrote it as a thank you to Matthew and Brittany, but also kind of like processing through my feelings and stuff, because they gave me space. Like, this is what I was rocking through. And like, you may have been aware of some of this, you might not have been aware of all of this, but these are all these different things I was rocking through, and you gave me space to process, didn't charge me anything, like allowed me to just be in that space in a really vulnerable time for me. And I had written this, I can't remember. I think it was like December 2017. I had written this piece. There might have been like other scribblings of it before. And Matthew ended up passing away from leukemia 2 years ago. You know, we're in 2020 now, so 2018. And so I never got to show him this piece. But I got to show Brittany this piece, and I've been keeping this piece a secret for quite some time. And Brittany only saw it leading up to me asking her to be a part of at least talking about this specific episode. She would have been on she would have been on like Fear Lane, as she is, which you should also go back and listen to if you haven't peeped it yet. So, you know, longer backstory than usual on these things, but that's kind of the background surrounding Process Place and that time for me, and really just the healing kind of nature of being able to process through the hurts and the hell that I was walking through in so many different ways. So I don't know, what do you think about that time frame, Brittany? Like, how do you remember that time frame with me crashing in y'all's house?
I think I've said it before, but I think the biggest thing I remember about that time frame was just like trying to create a space where you felt welcome to just be, trying to like make sure that you felt like you could be in all the spaces of the home, and that you weren't, you know, confined to just one bedroom. Again, I remember something you just said about like Matthew loving and figuring it out later. And that was definitely who he was. And I think we were definitely in that place at that time of our life. Like, just knowing that the need was there for you to have a space, and we'd figure out the rest of it later. So, I mean, that's really the most that I remember about that time in my life.
Yeah. I think like one of the things that sticks out to me from that season is like, even though in the beginning of my time with Matthew being my supervisor, we weren't doing like one-on-one meetings weekly and like check-in type things, which in like bigger church environments might happen like once a month. But with the church being as small as it was, we were able to do those things kind of once a week. And so Matthew got to see some of the ways that I was kind of consistently feeling, even if I was just working like, there was a time where I was working like 30 hours a week, but it was like Christmas time, and I guess it would have been Christmas time in 2015. And so very like being in a cold house that like was old, and so it's like creaking, and it's like not insulated well, and I don't do well if I get cold while I'm sleeping. Like, I'll get sick. I will absolutely get sick every time. And so I just remember though that season, like, one, it was just, you know, it was hard, but it was also a time where like Matthew was inviting me into y'all's life and live. But Matthew had invited me over to come and decorate y'all's Christmas tree. And I was like thinking in my head, I don't really want to say yes to this daggone thing. I don't want to get up and decorate nobody's tree. But I also knew that like at the same time, if I didn't get up out of like the stupor I was in, or take, it's like I can't be complaining about friendships and then having someone like reach out a hand and be a friend, and then not take that and like complain like, God, I don't have friends, like, or my friendships kind of suck. And pushing past some of those things and engaging in some of those conversations were really important. And even like that period of time, because I think like you were baking cookies and like me and him had to go to Walmart and
Get Christmas lights.
yeah, we had to go get Christmas lights. And I remember like this is kind of a show of like Matthew's growth and then like solidarity to me as time pressed on, was like we had this conversation about the Wiz, and like the Wiz was like coming out like a live action Wiz, and he was like, why would they make this cast with only black people? And like we had this like come to Jesus like race talk. It was like, what the hell are you talking about, guy? Like, this is not it. And so and I checked him really hard, and then like as time pressed on, and Matthew really kind of entered a state of becoming within the space of like solidarity for marginalized peoples, in the space of race conversations and feminism and LGBTQ type conversations, all these things all at the same time. And I did a project series called Freshness Fridays that those of you who followed my work for a while, you might have seen the series a couple years back. And every week I was talking about an experience of racism that I endured at some point in my life. And they were all anonymous. I never named anybody, even though I don't feel like I owed anybody not naming them, because if you were doing racist stuff, you were doing racist stuff. But I chose not to. And just to continue to like put out like, yo, this stuff still happens, and it happens all the time. And I did this for a year and a week, and I still had plenty more that I could tell. And so I wanted people to kind of grapple with that. And I remember I'd come back in for school or something one time and had gotten, dinner with y'all, like had come over for dinner. And Matthew was like, I'm waiting for mine to come out so that I can like put my hand up and say, yep, that was me. And like, and was really like, he's one of the first white folks that I have ever met in my entire life who was just like, I'm gonna own my loss. Like, I'm gonna own where I was, tripping. And then I'm gonna work towards solidarity. And I really saw that displayed. And I really saw that displayed even in the times that I was living with y'all, in that time and space I was living with y'all. I was like, y'all were among the few confidants that I could have in that time, to talk through some of the stuff that I was enduring, to talk through some of the racism I was going through at church, from congregation, from staff, from people in the area, from having to drive through Confederate flag tunnels during like race weeks at Bristol Motor Speedway. Like, all of these different things I'm walking through, and there weren't a lot of people to talk to about that stuff, because some folks were perpetuating it who I had been friends with throughout college, and just really just ignoring it. But yeah, like that time for me was really important, just to be able to process, to walk through life, and really just kind of grapple with and work through some of the stuff that I was going through. And I just think about how important it is in life to take time to process.
I think you just, sorry to interrupt, I think you just kind of hit on two different forms of processing: external processing, with you processing the different aspects of your life at that point with us over dinner or tree lighting, whatever it was. And then Matthew, he was doing a lot of internal processing at that point, like self-awareness, which I find incredibly important to processing, period. You've got to know where you are to know where you're going to go. I think he was doing a lot of that internal processing at the time, trying to just be better and do better. So you guys were in a similar place in life, I think, more similar than you realized, maybe.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, I feel like that moment was like that, like you could see a shift, like even within some of our, within our beginning one-on-ones, where he just really had to grapple with these stories that I tell him every week. And it'd be like, this is happening to me, this thing is going down. I just read this thing on Facebook from two people in our congregation who are sitting here like after the Super Bowl calling, you know, Beyonce, saying Beyonce's like backup dancers when she did the formation at the Super Bowl formation, like halftime show kind of performance, that her backup dancers hair looked like poodles. And it's like these two white people are saying this who go to our church. And then I was like, I had like written out a bunch of things. This was in Freshness Fridays, and I typed out like, you might as well have called them bitches. And I wish, like I don't wish that I would have said it at all, because I don't buy into the like arguing on Facebook thing. I don't really think it does a whole lot. I think it's a waste of my energy. The only time I do that, those sort of things, is like I'm gonna lay out a defense so that people who have like who are in solidarity will have a defense that's kind of laid out to them and have the facts. But those are the only times that I engage. But whether it was something like that, or there was a dude who had been on staff before at the church when I was in college, and he was always on my stuff. Like, and I eventually blocked him, but he was always saying something racist on my posts. And I remember like towards, you know, the end of my time at that church, and the closing part of Matthew's time at that church, Matthew had like taken that same guy to task on one of my posts before like I ended up blocking the dude and just saying like, this is a waste of my time and a waste of my energy, and this is a racist old white man that I don't want to talk to anymore. And you know, it was interesting, like being able to kind of like watch some of that transformation, because you know me, like I'm an external processor. I talk a whole lot and I have to work through stuff. I call you all the time to work through stuff. But yeah, some folks are internal processors, and having the self-awareness to understand like, yo, like I need to like take some time away and just think about this stuff and read these books and internalize these thoughts and really work through them. I suck at that. I suck at that totally. I'm like, no. Like, even if I'm alone, I'm talking to myself. I have to like get it outside of me. I don't know. Are you kind of both in that, or do you lean one way or another?
I probably lean a little internal processing, but I definitely have to have both.
Yeah.
I have to have the capacity for both. Or I don't know if capacity is the right word, but I have to have the option of both.
Yeah.
I don't do well. It comes back to like the quote that Matthew says kind of towards the end about surrounding yourself with, I think he said surround yourself with like godly people, or surround yourself and getting rid of people who aren't like building you up. And I come back to that, and it's like, it's about creating a community, setting yourself up to be able to process things with the people around you. And I think, you know, the last 2 years have taught me to do that with a lot of to be more intentional about that, I guess, is probably the way I'd want to say that. Just to be more intentional about who that community is and who I put in that community. Just through the processing that I've done in the last 2 years since his death.
Yeah. Because you don't have to you can't process with everyone, and it's so unhealthy to process with everyone. You know, it's probably going to sound like I'm taking a bunch of shots at Christianity within this, and I'm very strongly a Christian, and very much so believe, you know, in the person of Christ, but I also have a massive amount of critique for the white evangelical Christian church kind of structure. And a lot of the things that I have experienced since childhood in a lot of those different spaces. And one of the things that I think is potent is that there's a sense of forced vulnerability in certain kind of, Christian spaces like that. I remember going to a conference where it's a young adult conference. It's a really big conference. And after the conference, they will like after a night of the conference, they'll get you into these like massive, like these massive rooms. And then they'll have randomly paired you off with people. And then you're supposed to be in these like, little networks of like 4 or 5 people from different locations or whatever. And then like, there's this encouragement to like go deep sometimes. And it's just like, yo, this isn't healthy. Like you don't know these people. They don't need to know everything about you. They don't need to know your deepest, darkest. They don't need to know, like
your sin confessional.
Yeah, this isn't a confessional. This is some random folks that you gonna know for a couple days and you might keep in contact with, and like you can have these glory stories where someone meets their spouse in those groups or stays connected with those people for an extended period of time, but that's not largely the case. And I think about another time when I was a kid, in college, I guess a young adult really, but I was on a missions project, and it was like a 10-week joint, and they were telling us in like this opening night that you're gonna feel like after a night here that these people that you just met are gonna feel like you've known them your whole lives, just like because that's like this the intimacy of like who we are as Christians, like the intimacy of the Holy Spirit. And so you're gonna feel like so close to these people. And I just remember, I don't remember if I checked that in that moment, but like later on in the missions trip project joint, right, there was a cat who I lived with who was like trying to check me on stuff that had to do with my pops, like check me on feelings or tensions or something that had to do, like say I wasn't being forgiving enough or something like that to my dad, who was absent the vast majority of my childhood and was just not in the picture most of the time. And so it was like, you're trying to tell me after knowing me for 5 weeks or 6 weeks or 7 weeks, whatever it was, that like on something that you don't really have any sort of context or understanding around. And I checked them really hard and I said like, hey, yo, like you don't know me, cuz. Like this little environment might have made you feel like you got some like real big understanding of me, but you don't know what I've been through. You don't know what I've walked through. You don't know how this relationship was. Like you ain't got no position to be saying something out of pocket like that. And I checked him really hard and he ended up apologizing. But it was like, you can't say stupid ass stuff like that. Like you can't say stuff like that, because it's like, you don't have that place. Like trust is earned. C.S. Lewis says that to love at all is to be vulnerable. And, if you don't want to be vulnerable, you can kind of like put your heart away and it's just going to become hard and you're never really going to know what it's like to love someone and be human and stuff like that. Like it's inherently, you're going to like endure some stuff and that you have to be vulnerable to love. But everyone doesn't deserve your vulnerability. Like that has to be paired with wisdom as well. And so like in the space of processing the hardest spots in your life and things like that, you don't just go up to like random person in the gas station and just start like chatting up, whatever is super deep. Or even if people are inquiring who are like folks who don't have that position or place, like, they might just be trying to get that tea. Like they trying to spill the tea. They trying to have that good gossip, and just have it in. They just might be nosy. And so if they're like that, you got to be protective of some of the situations in your life. We talked about in the Wasted Way podcast with my sister, Krista, one of my sisters. And we were talking about how like we had this kind of thing when we were kids that was like, I'm not supposed to talk about family business because there'd be these nosy ass teachers and stuff like that in the Christian school that we went to when we were kids who would be trying to learn all the tea on like what was going down in our familial structure in our household and like what stuff we were going through just so they could be nosy. They weren't trying to help us or nothing like that, right? And yeah, so we were taught to like tell these people like I'm not allowed to discuss family business, to kind of be this defense mechanism. Like, whoa, slow your roll. You ain't supposed to know all this. Like, you don't need to know all this. You can calm your heavy behind down. And I think that that's so important. And I think that goes into what you were just talking about in terms of processing.
Yeah, setting boundaries for sure helps with that.
Yeah. What sort of boundaries have you found helpful, as you've been walking through and processing through grief over these past couple of years, and even like processing through, some of the things that you have for many years, whether that's things that, walking through like your thoughts about faith, questions like, does God exist? Like what are these things that I've been taught, like, deconstructing some of those different ideas and, figuring out like what is going to be reconstructed and what is changing and what is kind of moving in different directions. Like what sort of boundaries and stuff have you found to be helpful for you?
Well, that's like a super hard question. It's an easy question to answer, but I feel like the wrong person to ask this, like a question about boundaries too, because if you know anything about the Enneagram, I'm an Enneagram 5. And so I keep to myself a lot when it comes to feelings. And one of the big conversations I've been having with a few people lately, people in my inner circle, is the difference between transparency and vulnerability. Because those two things look like each other to the outside world. But to me, those two things are super different. And so I have a level of transparency with just about anybody. Like I tend to feel, I'm an open book about that. I'll tell you whatever you want to, I can tell you whatever you want to know. But then to allow like the vulnerable space of feeling about that is so different. And I guess the best way to express that is like, by the time I tell certain people things, I've removed the risk that it's going to have to me. And so there's no vulnerability there. It's just transparency. It's just, I can tell you about my grief and my loss. And I think maybe that's the boundary that I've created, which is maybe not healthy. I need to think through that. I need to process that later with you.
Yeah.
Like,
hey, call me up.
But the boundary I think I've set is one that exists between transparency and vulnerability. And there are people in my life that get a transparent version of me. But the number of people who get a vulnerable side of me, that's, a handful of people, if that.
Yeah.
So I think that's like one of the biggest things that has happened over the past few years is that like create like that difference, that boundary line maybe has gotten a little thicker.
Yeah. That's super interesting because it makes me think about like, one, it's kind of interesting that like as this is about to come out, this stuff is about to roll out, that Lecrae drops album and it seems like to me the most massive rollout that he's ever done in terms of like what's coming out on social media and things like that. And Lecrae's album is called Restoration, and I think there are some parallels that exist within his record, uh, with in kind of connection to this one, and I think some of those things will become more clear as City of God continues to draw out and come out, and the series continues. And it's going to end a lot later than Lecrae's record, having been fully out, but you might see some of those connections if you listen to both. And so Cray talks about, some hard stories, both in that record. I think about his record, All Things Work Together. He talks about like, taking a girl to go get an abortion, like paying for an abortion and regretting that, and like kind of, and like leaving a girl at an altar, at the altar, and like just chucking deuces, which is just so wild. And then he talks about, I think like his book hasn't come out yet at the time that we're recording this, but his book, I Am Restored, How I Lost My Faith and Found, or Lost My Religion and Found My Faith, something like that. And he says that he talks about all sorts of deep stuff, like the potential that a divorce could have happened in his marriage. How he at one point he was like popping Xanax. At one point he was, drinking to kind of dull the pain and stuff, and was clinically depressed and didn't really know it. He was like on tour and like drinking too much to kind of like numb some of the stuff that he was feeling. And sometimes I'm like, dang, Cray, you telling a lot. I'm like, yo, hold up. And he talks about, I listened to an interview today actually, from him, and he was talking about how he was talking about how he's been in therapy the last 2 years, and like how that's been really helpful for him to process through some of the things that he has walked through his whole life, and that he had tried therapy after Michael Brown was murdered. And it just, he said therapists are like, he said therapists are like significant others. You got to date them. Like, you need to go through a couple before you find the right one. And so, which I think is a super helpful thing to say to people. But I think about like, yo, Kyle, you telling a lot, Cray. You sure you're supposed to be telling that? Like, hold up, bro. Like, but it makes me think about what you just said, Brittany, about transparency versus vulnerability. Like, there's an aspect where there's probably some things that he's vulnerable about. Taking a risk to put something on wax is very different than, talking among a select group of people or something. But there's probably an aspect where he has removed the risk of telling certain things, which I think also kind of plays into the fact that people often talk about stuff when they come out of it rather than while they're in it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, things like deconstructing faith, or something like Cray talking about Xanax, or, heavy drinking or something like that. Porn addiction, like, all these different things, right? There's usually not a whole lot of like, I'm in the process of overcoming this, or I'm in the process of like walking through this. I think some of those conversations are like growing more in the space of therapy, but it's not like at the beginning, like, I just started therapy because I just realized that I'm like messed up. I'm stupid messed up, and I need to help. Like, I need help walking through this stuff. And I think for me, which I think Process is a good track to think about in terms of talking about going to therapy, and because sometimes you're not sitting in a room and like having space to yourself and, alleviating some of the tensions and pressures of life might not be enough to walk through certain things. Like, I know for me, that as soon as I get some guap moving in my life, I plan to go and find a therapist to walk through some of the traumas of my childhood, some of my traumas within growing up in America as a Black kid, some of the traumas that I've had going to and, being on staff at certain like white evangelical churches, and really kind of processing through, how is this stuff affecting me? How is my dad not being there affecting me? You know, what are these things looking like, and how do we unearth this so that I'm not driving blind when there's like towards a dead end. But you look like you're about to say something.
So I was just thinking, when you were talking about the therapy thing and about looking into that a little bit later, thinking that there is someone I follow who has a fund set up for Black people looking for therapy. Like it's specifically set up for that. And like I think it might be, I don't know if it's a GoFundMe or what, I can't remember, but it's been going on for a few years and building for a few years. You should look into that.
Yeah, no, definitely send me the information about that. Because I think it's super important. Like, you know, there's been a couple different times in my life where like, I remember as a kid, like there was a point where like my mom took us to like a group therapy session. And I think we did a couple of those, but we didn't do a ton of those. And then at the end of my high school career, you know, you're already at the point of like the peak of puberty, right? You know, and so boys start acting more aggressive at those times, a lot of the times, because of, you know, the spike in testosterone and the growth of who you are. And then I was a wrestler, but then I also had like daddy issues. And so, and then like I wasn't some star athlete at the time. I guess at that point I was becoming a star athlete. I was undefeated. But I wasn't before that, because I didn't start until my junior year of high school. And then I was all state once, and that was it. And then wrestled in college. But I was really dealing with some of the stuff and some of the situations that we were walking through in life. My dad not being there, struggling with the fact that like of my siblings, I looked the most like my dad. And I was like, I was pressing into all of these tensions. And I started being really hard to deal with. I started being like really, really hard to handle for my mom, for my siblings. You know, it's like I'm an Enneagram 4 with a 3 wing, for those who know anything about the Enneagram. And the Enneagram 4 is the individualist. It's like, you know, called like the most complex number on the Enneagram. And then I'm also, you know, 3 wings. So I'm trying to like win. I'm trying to be a top dog. And so like, I'm having the tension of like, I remember like there was a breaking point for me where like I had lost my first match of the year on a fluke. And that was like leveling me. I was having all this other stuff go on. Like my grades I wasn't a great student. You know, I was like mediocre, and I had friends who were like, you know, my best friend in high school was, you know, valedictorian of the high school. And I had like 3 of my closest friends were top 5 in the class. And so it was like, I had people achieving all around me, and I was still kind of in this space of like, I don't know what's next for me. And so I became like really, really, really difficult to deal with. And my mom, like I was angry. I remember I put a hole in the wall once. It was like early Saturday morning. She asked me to take out the trash. I jumped off from like down my loft bed and jumped to the floor, walked in the hallway, decked the wall, put a hole in it, walked downstairs. Because I was having such a hard time like processing these things. And I have 5 siblings and a nephew, grew up all together. And so, you know, you're confined in a spot, right? When you're a kid whose like core thing is to be an individual, be yourself, have space to yourself. I'm really like, you know, inspired by and like influenced by my space, hence why this looks like this and things like that, right? And all those things cannot be working at, you know, at this time, right? And so I was really, really struggling. And so my mom ended up sending me to, or like taking me to like one of the pastors of the church we were a part of when I was growing up. And like he was he wasn't a licensed therapist or anything. It's just, pastoral counseling type stuff. Which I don't know, it has its place. Certain pastors get training in those things. Some people are just called pastors, and then people tell them to start giving people advice. And I don't know that that's always the best thing, but at least like it gave me a male figure in my life to kind of bounce stuff off of. And so I was able to process through some of the pains and stuff I was going through. But yeah, I like it took something external to kind of help me see some light within that season. And I don't remember how helpful or non-helpful that time was, but I just remember like my mom just being like, this has to be done because like I don't know what to do. And I just think that's a reality. Like if processing hurt, everybody's like not built to just figure it out. I would imagine that most people aren't built to just figure it out. Like you need guidance, you need help, you need, and so with big issues,
we're built for community.
Exactly. And so it's like with people who are like, if you're clinically depressed, you shouldn't be like, oh, I'm just going to get out of this myself. Like, no, you probably need some help. Like you probably need some antidepressants too. If you're going through like massive traumas, like you probably should be like processing that with someone who has some insight in how to process some of those hard moments and difficult times and spaces. So yeah, definitely send me that info.
I will. Yay for your mom for believing in therapy and for seeking it out for you at such a young age.
Yeah. I think that was an important step for me. And I remember like even in those like group therapy sessions, like I'm an emotional cat in general. So like you make me talk about anything like difficult and I'm just gonna like, just gonna start like bawling. It's just,
opposite of me.
Yeah, I'm like, I am hurting. And then it's just like it's all coming out.
Anybody watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine? That's the question. Do you watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine?
I don't watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
The captain on that, they can never tell what his emotions are because he has the blank stare. Like that's been more my life until the past 2 years.
Yeah.
Keep my emotions in check as a 5.
Well, we'll talk about that then. Like, how did you shifted from like your 5ness being like, I'm putting up a wall against like my emotions, and then like how did that shift for you? Like what did that actually look like?
I think part of it is just recognizing it, and it is because I do a lot of internal processing. So it's like, again, self-awareness is a big deal to me. And I don't think you can do processing without self-awareness. And I became very aware that I needed the people around me, that I couldn't do it by myself, that I wasn't managing my grief or the loss alone. So trying to manage those feelings, that was one of the big things actually I did ask a therapist about, was how to process or how to control my emotions. Basically, losing Matthew was the first time in my life that I could no longer rationalize my feelings, put them in a nice, neat little box and like store them away over here for safekeeping or for not safekeeping. And I don't know if that's just the nature of like deep trauma and deep loss, but the feelings were just so overwhelming. I couldn't box them in, couldn't box them up. And so I needed other people to process that with. And so that meant not only like allowing myself to have feelings, but like allowing people to see those too. So.
Yeah. It's like everybody has a lid, right? Like everyone has a capacity, and to experience loss on the level that you did, there's no well that could have been deep enough to like handle that. Like, it was going to spill over regardless of what happened. The thing is spilling over. And so like you need a freaking dump truck to come in and grab all that water, or it's just going to be everywhere. Like, you know, whatever shooting at, like, it's like you have to like manage it somehow. Like it's like there's no way that you and your little bucket is going to deal with this thing just shooting up like everywhere. You know, it's like the freaking what's the daggone show, the Beverly Hillbillies, where they strike freaking oil and then they become rich or whatever. It's like, you know, it's the opposite of the goodness of like striking oil, right? It's like, you know, striking lava, you know. but
it's a really good analogy. I like that.
it's like if you hit, like, they hit that like oil, and then it's like, no, now there has to be like a company come in and handle this oil and like set up an infrastructure in order to manage what is spilling over. And so like if there's lava shooting up from the ground, like a volcano becomes active, right? That was not active before, and stuff is shooting up. You can't just be like, oh cool, well, I'm gonna just put some water on this and it's gonna turn to a rock and we Gucci. It's like, no, you need somebody to come in and manage this situation and help you manage this situation. Like, even if you're a part of it, like you need people to come in and like help to process, help to grieve, help to walk through, and work through a scenario. Because even for me, even in a way more trivial circumstance of like the circumstances of Process Lane, I guess I won't call them trivial because I was definitely going through stuff. I just wasn't going through the grief that you were as losing your husband, and I wasn't going through the grief of losing one of my best friends. And so, you know, when within that time and space, I couldn't do it alone. Living in that house alone was not good for me. And even when I started like having a shift, it was when I got out of the house and started going to the, you know, bakery down the street, the coffee shop and bakery, Blackbird Bakery, shout out, was when I could like just be out of the space and interact with people and be in a healthier state of mind. And then living with y'all, it was like, even if I was not in a great space, or even if I was not feeling, or really this, it's like, even if I was not feeling up to coming out of the room, I knew that people were there. It's like, I knew y'all were there. I knew that like I could come out and have a conversation. I knew I could post up at, you know, your dining room table and get on my laptop and be able to just work and talk. And that stuff was helpful and healing for me. And I just don't think that circumstance of that time would have been helpful. You know, it would not have taken the positive upturns that it did had I not taken time to just sit down and be among y'all, among others, and seek wisdom in some of those spaces of life. Yeah. Because you can't walk through it alone. You can't walk, like you said, we're meant for community. People aren't meant to be alone. Yeah, it's like the major message of, you look at however anyone believes about the Adam and Eve narrative, whether you believe it to be factual or an allegory or whatever, I don't care. It's not good for a human to be alone. A person to be alone is a very good thing to process and consume within your life. I don't care if you're a Christian, a Buddhist, a atheist, agnostic, Taoist, Muslim. I don't care where your views about the world and God or the lack thereof, a higher power is. It's good to know that you're not meant to be alone. You're a relational person. People are relational people. And so I think that that's important. But then, like you said, those boundaries and knowing what it looks like to process and grieve and work through stuff needs to end up being like. So yeah. It's good stuff. Last thing I'll say is, you've talked some about your grief within the space of losing Matthew, and from my perspective, being on a different side of things, like Matthew is one of my closest friends, and so like for me, one of the things that was really helpful for me in that time period, we've talked about this before, but one of my friends, Nathan Kacharis, he had told me, who Brittany knows Nathan, and y'all will meet Nathan later in this series. But Nate told me as I was driving to like try to make it to like when Matthew had coded in the hospital, was he was telling me like throughout that period of time to like, it is okay to feel the range of emotions. Like it was okay to feel all the different things that I was feeling, whether it was joy, whether it was anger, whether it was rage, sadness. Because like you could feel like, I know at least for me, you can feel guilty for feeling certain things. If I ever felt any good thing within that season, like, am I supposed to? Am I forgetting Matthew because I'm having a good day right now? And I really had to have like some of those conversations. Like that conversation with Nathan was a really helpful and grounding moment for me, because it was like, grief is a freaking range of things. You just don't know when that ish is going to hit. Like you don't know when grief is going to come smack you in the face and what's going to trigger it. And how it's gonna play out. It's like there have been times, like even within creating this podcast series, for this season, I looked at some of the tracks that I was rocking through, and I was like, dang, Matthew would be a good person to talk to for this track, and it wasn't here. I can't have that. And it's like one of Matthew's biggest goals. He's like, the last thing that he told me, like in terms of seeing him face to face, was like about trying to get this thing to come out, like trying to get this thing to come into fruition. And I had planned to release this 2 years ago in like August. And I told him I was going to try to get it done in August, like by August. And he said, good, that gives me a goal to live towards. And like, that was like, what the heavy statement did you just say? Like, well, and like, that felt like some inconceivable, like, what are you talking about, bruh? August is like super soon. Like, you're going to live way past that. And unfortunately he didn't. He made it like a month. And so it was like, for me, even with completing this project, which is dedicated to Matthew, for those who weren't paying attention to the first track of the record and seeing what that played out like, but yeah, this record is dedicated to Matthew. He gave me a pair of headphones to monitor my audio and do demos, gave me an interface so that I could actually have my computer hooked up to something so I could record these demos. He tried to give me a mic, which I denied, and then asked Brittany for after he had passed, because I was like, I want to do this. I don't know if I told you this, I recorded this entire record on that mic. And so like this,
incredible.
This entire project was recorded on that microphone, which is sitting behind me right now. In this little, case, there's intentionality to like everything I do artistically, people. And so, I've got the book of Matthew because it says Matthew's full name behind me. And then the headphones that he gave me, one of the ears was blown out of it, so I'm just using it as a display piece at this point. And then the microphone that he gave me that I recorded all his podcasts, anything that I've had to do that involved better audio, has been that microphone for a long time. Aside from right now where it's displayed and I'm using a shotgun mic that I had bought a couple weeks ago. But it's like there's so much of my memory and legacy of him that is tied into this. And as I continue to make this, like, there are things that I'm processing through. There's things that, there's still things you're gonna miss. There's still things that you're gonna wish were happening. Things that you just don't see coming, where it's like, oh, I'm working on this graphic design piece, and then it reminds me of something, and then I'm like, all of a sudden you're in a whirlwind that you didn't realize that you were in. And that's why you need people. That's why you need help. That's why you need support. That's why you need, people to grieve with, and to support others who are rocking through stuff. But then also know when you're out of your league, and you're not, like, where you can steer people towards, like, hey, I'm gonna hear you out and hear everything that you need to say, but I also think that this needs to be talked about with someone who has a better understanding and grasp on how to process through some of these conversations and some of these tough things. So,
a professional with training.
Exactly. Yeah. Because I remember in college, there were times, because people kind of viewed me as the student Christian leader of our campus. And so people would come to me for advice about everything. And I remember, like, this is weird, cuz, like, I can't do all this. And even in high school, people used to do that stuff to me, and talk to me about some heavy stuff that I wish in high school I would have had the wisdom to ask someone to give me some direction. But it's like, I remember moments like that, and I started asking some of, like, the like actual Christian leaders on campus, in terms of, like, adults who had, more training in the church and things like that, and had been through plenty of counseling sessions and stuff. And I just started asking those people, like, hey, what do I do? Like, what should I do in this situation? This person came to me with this thing, what do I need to, how do I, like, process through this, or how do I walk through this scenario? And a lot of those times they would tell me, like, yeah, it's okay to be like, I'll listen to you, but I'm totally out of my league. You should talk to the counselor on campus, and things like that. And that was a way better move. But yeah, well, I said that was going to be the last thing I said, but this is going to be the last thing I say, I promise. I do very much so think back on that season really fondly, and I appreciate you, Brittany, for not shutting Matthew down for telling you a day before, the day of, that I was coming to move into y'all's house.
I was gonna say, I think that's pretty typical when you tell the story about Christmas lights. I'm pretty sure it was like a momentary decision of, hey, I don't think Trevor has anybody to do Christmas things with, because he's here in Bristol. Like, we're gonna invite him, okay? But it was already done.
Yeah.
So I think that was just the way that he moved in life. And I love that. I would say the way we both moved in life, really. So
love first, figure it out later. I mean, one of the things that I forgot to say in your introduction is that you are very quick to support those that you care about. You show up. You're one who shows up. You're a person who has come to watch me preach in times that I've gotten to preach. You're at kids' games and graduations and parties and house sitting and taking care in situations of need for other our friends. Like, you're a person who's like, I'm gonna go back and forth to Bristol, and go and hike this mountain with these kids because I want them to know that they're loved, and cared for, and things like that. And yeah, I mean, like I said, for me, it's like you've always shown up for me, even when I wasn't asking you to come and show up for me. and so that love first mentality is one of those things that I've very much so taken and learned a lot from, especially in that season. It's one of the big examples of it in my life where, yeah, as I said in the end of the piece, so thank you, Newtons, for opening a place for me to process, to build, to breathe, to be, and asking nothing more of me. In your reflections, I see the one who defeated the lynching tree. And that's real. That's from the heart. That's true. So Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. It gives me something to live up to, I think.
Awesome.
Keep living up to.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll let you go. Appreciate y'all for watching this episode of Durag Thoughts, and tune in on Monday to see the next chapter in the series in City of God, and then tune in a week from now on Friday to hear me talk to my next guest about that chapter, that next piece in the series, in the record. And I'll catch y'all on the flip. Be easy, be safe. Peace.